my God, who did this to you?" Elena's voice cracked as the flashlight trembled in her hand. The narrow beam cut through the damp darkness and landed on a man collapsed on the concrete floor. Blood dried and fresh pooled beneath him like a dark halo. His white shirt was soaked crimson, torn open to reveal a gunshot wound in his shoulder and a deep gash across his ribs. His face was bruised beyond recognition, his breathing shallow, his skin pale as ash. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. The basement smelled of rust, mildew, and something metallic, something dying. This was supposed to be a simple cleaning job one afternoon in a vacant mansion on the quiet edge of South Boston. The realtor had smiled, casual as could be, empty for months, nothing but dust and cobwebs. Now there was a living man bleeding out in the shadows. She knelt despite herself, old instincts rising from a life she thought she'd buried 2 years of nursing school before Noah came, before Derek, before everything fell apart. She pressed her hands against the wound in his side, feeling the wet warmth seep through her fingers. He groaned, eyes fluttering open, gray eyes, cold and sharp, even through the haze of pain. "Don't," he rasped, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't call anyone. You'll die if I don't help you. I'll die faster if you do." Elena's jaw tightened. She pulled gauze from her bag, always prepared, always careful, and pressed it hard against the wound. He hissed through clenched teeth, but didn't push her away. She worked quickly, cleaning the blood from his temple, checking his pulse, tipping water slowly to his cracked lips. Color returned to his face in fragile increments. "What's your name?" she asked. A pause. His gray eyes studied her, calculating, even now. "Dominic," he said finally. "Dominic Crane." The name hit her like a freight train. Crane. The billboards downtown. The casino empire. The man whose face graced Forbes covers, and whose name was whispered in the same breath as power and danger. The man who had vanished 3 weeks ago without a trace. Her mouth went dry. "You're that Dominic Crane?" "I was," he said quietly, a bitter smile ghosting across his bloodied lips. "Before my brother decided I was worth more dead than alive." Then from above came the faint sound of footsteps. Elena froze. Dominic's eyes widened, not with fear, but with something darker. Warning. The footsteps grew louder. A door opened somewhere upstairs. A man's voice, sharp, irritated, muttered into a phone. The basement light snapped on. What the hell? A tall man in a tailored coat stood at the top of the stairs, phone still pressed to his ear. Handsome, clean cut, with the same gray eyes as Dominic but colder, emptier. His gaze landed on Elena, then flicked past her to the blood-soaked figure on the floor. His expression shifted from surprise to rage in a heartbeat. "Who the fuck are you?" Elena scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. "Sir, I'm the cleaner. The realtor sent me. I just got here, I haven't seen anything, you're covered in blood." He descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, predatory. "And you're telling me you haven't seen anything?" "I thought it was a dead animal. I was just checking." He moved faster than she expected. His hand closed around her throat, slamming her back against the wall. Her head cracked against the concrete. Stars exploded behind her eyes. "You people," he hissed, breath hot against her face. "Always think you can stumble into places you don't belong." His grip tightened. "Who's going to believe a cleaning lady over me?" Elena clawed at his hand, gasping. "Please, I have a son." Something flickered in his eyes. Not mercy, calculation. He released her with a shove that sent her sprawling to the floor. "You talk about this to anyone, police, press, your fucking priest, and I will destroy everything you have." He crouched down, tilting her chin up with one finger. "Your job, your apartment, your son's school, everything. Do you understand?" She nodded rapidly, tears streaming down her face. "I won't say a word, I swear." "Good." He stood, straightening his coat. "Get out, and if I ever see your face again, you'll end up worse than him." Elena scrambled up the stairs, legs shaking, lungs burning. She burst through the front door and ran to her car, hands trembling so violently she dropped her keys twice. She didn't look back. She couldn't. But as she drove away, the image of Dominic's eyes followed her, gray and sharp, filled with pain and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. That night, after Noah was asleep, Elena sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her throat still ached where Marcus had grabbed her. Her hands still smelled like blood, no matter how many times she washed them. His voice echoed in her mind. Low, broken. "Don't call anyone." He knew his brother would kill him. He knew no one was coming. And still, he hadn't begged, hadn't pleaded, just looked at her with those gray eyes like he'd already accepted his fate. Elena closed her eyes, knowing she should forget, knowing she should protect Noah above everything else, knowing that walking back into that house meant walking into a world she couldn't begin to understand. But she also knew with a certainty that settled heavy in her chest that she had been the one in the dark once. Bleeding, broken, praying for someone to come, and no one had. She couldn't be that person. She couldn't walk away and live with herself. Elena opened her eyes. Decision made. Tomorrow, she would go back. If Elena's courage gave you chills, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose life it might touch. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. The next morning, Elena woke before the sun rose. She'd barely slept at all. The image of the man lying in a pool of blood had haunted her through the night. She stood in the kitchen, looked toward Noah, sleeping soundly in the room, and then made a decision she knew could change everything. She opened the medicine cabinet and took out everything she could use: bandages, antiseptic, the antibiotics left over from when Noah had strep throat, fever reducer, medical cotton. She added 2 bottles of water, a few protein bars, and a loaf of bread to an old cloth bag. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the zipper closed. She knew exactly what she was doing. She also knew how insane it was, but she couldn't stop. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, Elena knocked on the door of the apartment next door. Mrs. Patterson, the 72-year-old neighbor with snow-white hair and a gentle smile, opened it. She often helped watch Noah when Elena had to work the night shift. Elena tried to keep her voice steady. "I have to go clean a house out in the suburbs, and I might be home late. Could you watch Noah for me, Mrs.?" Patterson nodded without a shred of suspicion. She reached out and pinched Elena's cheek with affection. "Go on and work, sweetheart. Don't you worry. Noah will be here with me." Elena hugged Noah tight before she left, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and her son's hair. If something happened to her today, this might be the last time she ever held him. The thought stabbed through her chest. Still, she walked out the door. She drove to the mansion close to 5 o'clock in the evening, when the sunlight began to fade. She'd watched from a distance for a full hour, making sure there were no cars parked in the driveway, no shadow moving behind the panes of glass. Marcus wasn't here, at least not right now. Elena broke in through the back door, where the lock was old and easy to force. Her heart hammered wildly as she went down the basement stairs, a flashlight in her hand sweeping each step. The smell of blood and damp rot hit her in the face. Then she saw him. Dominic was still lying there, in the exact spot as yesterday, as if he didn't have the strength to move even an inch, but something was different. His face was flushed, sweat soaked his forehead. His temperature was so high she could feel the heat radiating from him when she dropped to her knees beside him. He was delirious, lips moving around, words that didn't make sense. Infection. The wound had gotten infected. Elena moved on instinct. 2 years of nursing school hadn't been enough to earn a degree, but it was enough for her to know what she had to do. She cut away the old bandage, now yellowed and reeking. The wound at his side was swollen, pus beginning to form. She cleaned it with saline, applied antiseptic, then dusted antibiotic powder over it before wrapping it again. Dominic groaned in his fever dream but didn't wake. She tipped 2 fever reducer pills into his mouth, lifted his head, and forced him to drink, 1 small sip at a time. Most of the water spilled out, but some slid down his throat. She sat beside him for a full hour, changing the cool cloth on his forehead, watching his breathing moment by moment. Little by little, the fever eased. The red in his cheeks faded. His breaths became steadier. Then those gray eyes opened. At first they were clouded, empty. But when he saw her, something flashed. Surprise, confusion, and something else Elena didn't dare name. "You came back." His voice was raw, as if his throat had been bone dry for a long time. It wasn't a question. It was a stunned statement. Elena nodded and kept wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I told you. I know what it feels like to be left in the dark." Dominic didn't speak. He only stared at her, with the look of someone who'd lived on betrayal, who'd grown used to being abandoned, and now didn't know what to do with the fact that someone had actually stayed. Maybe this was the first time in his life that power and money weren't what kept someone at his side. Just a choice. Elena stood when the sky began to darken. She couldn't stay any longer. Noah was waiting, and Marcus could come back at any moment. She turned to go, and then felt a hand close around her wrist. Light, weak, but strong enough to stop her. "Tomorrow, same time," Dominic said, his voice no more than a whisper. It wasn't an order. It wasn't the demand of a man used to giving commands. It was the plea of someone who was drowning, clinging to the last piece of driftwood. Elena looked down at his hand on her wrist. Then she nodded. "Tomorrow," she said softly, and then she slipped her hand free and climbed the stairs, leaving the most powerful man in Boston alone in the dark. But this time, he knew someone would come back. And sometimes, just knowing that is enough to keep a person alive. On the third day, Elena realized Dominic was much better. The fever had broken completely, and his gray eyes were no longer glazed over, but sharp again, even if exhaustion still left its mark. He could sit with his back against the wall now, though every movement still made him wince with pain. Elena sat across from him on the cold concrete floor, changing the bandage on the wound along his ribs. She worked in silence, but hundreds of questions were twisting through her mind. Finally, she couldn't hold them back anymore. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft but strong enough to crack the stillness. "Why would your brother do that?" Dominic didn't answer right away. He stared up at the basement ceiling, where a lone bulb hung on a wire, long dead. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and distant, as if he were telling the story of someone else, not himself. "Marcus is my half-brother, same father, different mother," he said. "My father was a ruthless man. He beat Marcus's mother until she left. Then he married my mother. He treated me like a prince." And Marcus stood outside looking in. Always the bastard son, never good enough. Elena's hands stilled as she looked at him. "That wasn't your fault." Dominic gave a quiet laugh, bitter as ash. "No. But I never tried to change it either. I had everything. I didn't realize he had nothing." He fell silent for a moment, then went on. "That night, Marcus called me, said he wanted to meet, to talk about family business." His voice sounded sincere. I believed him. I went alone. I didn't bring anyone with me. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Elena listened, her heart tightening. She could picture it, the most powerful man in Boston walking into a trap because he trusted his own brother. "When I got there, they were waiting," Dominic said, his voice turning cold. "Roman Castellano's men, the boss of the rival family I've been fighting for 10 years. They shot me before I could react, one bullet to the shoulder." He lifted a hand and touched the wound Elena had wrapped with such care. "I went down. I thought I was going to die. But then Marcus stepped forward." Elena held her breath. "And then?" Dominic looked straight into her eyes. His gaze was empty, like he'd made peace with this pain a long time ago. He pulled out a knife, looked at me, then stabbed. He indicated the wound at his ribs. One strike, deep, but not deep enough to kill. He didn't have the nerve to finish me. He just stood there, watched me bleed, then ordered his people to drag me down here, to let me die slowly. Elena felt sick. That kind of cruelty went beyond anything she could have imagined. She knew this world was dark. She knew people could do horrific things to each other, but hearing a man describe being stabbed by his own brother still made her shiver. "The bullet was business," Dominic said, his voice calm in a way that was almost frightening. "But the knife? That was my brother's hand." And he still didn't have the courage to see it through. Silence settled over the basement. Elena didn't know what to say. She could only sit there, looking at the man in front of her with a new understanding. This wasn't only a mafia boss. This was a man betrayed by his own blood. "Do you know what shocked me most?" Dominic asked, still staring into the empty space ahead. I wasn't shocked. Deep down, I always knew this could happen. When you have power, everyone wants something from you. Nobody simply stays. That's the price of power. You never know who's real. He looked at Elena, his gray eyes sharp, holding a question he didn't say out loud. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" Elena read the question in his gaze, but she didn't answer it. Instead, she asked her own, "Why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you get someone to help you? You're Dominic Crane. You've got an entire empire." Dominic laughed, but there wasn't a trace of humor in it. "Because Marcus has my money, my attorneys, my connections. Right now, to the outside world, he is me." He tilted his head, his eyes weary but keen. "And who do you think they'd believe? A house cleaner or a billionaire? Money always speaks louder than the truth." Elena didn't respond. She knew he was right. She'd lived her whole life in a world where her voice carried no weight. A poor woman, a single mother, a cleaner. Nobody listened to people like her. But she was still here, and she wasn't going to walk away. On the 5th day, Elena arrived at the mansion in the late afternoon. As usual, she'd fallen into a dangerous habit now, a secret routine known only to her and the man in the basement. Dominic was much stronger. He could sit up on his own without help, and the wound was slowly healing, even though it still hurt. Elena was changing his bandage, her hands quick and sure after days of practice, when she heard it, the sound of a car engine, tires grinding over gravel, a car door slamming shut. The blood in her veins turned to ice. Dominic reacted instantly, his eyes sharpening. He's back early. Hide. Now. Elena didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed the medical bag in a panic and shoved it beneath an old tarp in the corner of the basement. Then she looked around, frantic for somewhere to disappear. The stack of cardboard boxes. She lunged toward them and pressed herself into the narrow space behind. Before she vanished completely into the dark, Dominic lowered himself to the floor, closed his eyes, and let his body go loose, as if he were still trapped in a coma. Heavy footsteps thudded on the stairs. Then the light snapped on, harsh and blinding. Elena watched through a slit between the boxes, her heart beating like it wanted to tear out of her chest. Marcus came down into the basement. He looked different from the first time she'd seen him. The expensive suit was the same, the cold posture was the same. But now there was something smug in the way he moved. Like he'd won. Like everything was unfolding exactly the way he'd planned. He walked straight to where Dominic lay. He looked down at his brother with open contempt. Then he kicked. Hard. Right into Dominic's ribs. Right where the wound was. Dominic didn't react, even though Elena knew that kick had to hurt beyond words. He stayed perfectly still, breathing evenly like a man lost in a deep, unbroken stupor. Marcus spat on his brother. Pathetic, he sneered. The King of Boston. Look at you now. His phone rang. He answered, and his voice changed completely, becoming smooth, almost respectful. Roman. Yes, everything's ready. The transfer meeting will happen in 5 days. He glanced down at Dominic. He'll be dead before then. Nobody's coming to save him. Elena forced herself not to breathe. She pressed deeper into the darkness, praying he wouldn't turn his head in her direction. But then Marcus paused. He drew a long breath in, his nose wrinkling. There's a smell, he said into the phone, his tone turning suddenly sharp. Hold on. He scanned the basement, eyes sweeping every shadowed corner. Cheap soap. Someone's been here. Elena's heart nearly exploded. Soap. She'd used cheap soap at home that morning. The scent was still on her skin. In her hair. Marcus started to circle the basement, his steps slow and deliberate. He was hunting. Elena held her breath, flattening her back to the wall, her body shaking in a way she couldn't control. His footsteps came closer, closer still. Then he stopped, right in front of the boxes where she was hiding. Elena shut her eyes. She could hear his breathing, could feel his presence only a few steps away. This is it, she thought. Noah, her son. She was never going to see him again. Marcus's phone rang again. He muttered a soft curse, then turned and walked away to answer. Elena nearly collapsed from relief, but then she heard what he said, and the blood in her veins turned to ice all over again. Yeah, run that name again for me. Elena Vance, 127 Maple Street, apartment 4B. She's got a kid at Jefferson Elementary. Name's Noah, 6 years old. He paused, listening. Then he gave a cold laugh. Not yet. No need to do anything fast. It's just insurance. But if someone's poking around out here, you start with the kid. Mothers always break faster when their children get touched. Then he went up the stairs, his footsteps fading, the door slamming shut. Elena didn't move. She couldn't. Her body was numb, her mind spinning. He knew her name, her address, her son's school, Noah, her 6-year-old boy, innocent, and tied to none of this. She stumbled out of her hiding place, her face white as paper. Dominic had opened his eyes and was watching her, grave. You have to stop coming here, he said, low and serious. Right now. Run. Elena shook her head, her voice trembling but firm. He knows my address. He knows my son's school. Running won't save me anymore. Dominic watched her for a long time. Then something shifted in his eyes. It wasn't only the will to survive anymore. It was something else. Protection. Resolve. 5 days, he said, his voice like steel. That's all I need. I'll get you out of this. Both of you. On the 6th day, Dominic could sit up without Elena having to brace him. The wound was healing. Slowly. He leaned back against the cold basement wall, watching her change his bandages in the weak spill of light from her flashlight. Elena worked in silence, her mind still spinning from what had happened yesterday. Marcus knew her name. He knew her address. He knew about Noah. Every time the thought rose up, her hands started to shake again. She reached for a fresh roll of gauze, and that was when her sleeve slid up, baring her wrist. Dominic saw it. Faint scars, old but still there. Parallel marks, not something she'd done to herself, but the lingering evidence of being tied up, yanked around, held so tightly the skin had bruised and split. Elena realized he was looking. She yanked her sleeve down, but it was too late. She waited for the question, waited for judgment. But Dominic didn't ask. He just stayed silent, gray eyes deep, fixed on her with something that looked like understanding. And that silence made Elena want to speak. "I got married when I was 19, she heard herself say, as if someone else were speaking through her, to a man named Derek. I thought it was love. It turned out to be hell." Dominic still didn't speak. He only listened. 3 years, she went on, her voice flat, like she was describing another woman's life. 3 years I lived in fear. Every day I wondered what I'd do wrong today. What I'd get hit for today. She looked down at her wrist. "I ran when I found out I was pregnant. Not because I was brave. Because I couldn't let my child grow up in that. Derek came after me. He was drunk, driving like a maniac. Then there was an accident. He died." She lifted her eyes to Dominic. "I didn't save myself. I just survived long enough for fate to handle it." Dominic was quiet for a long time. The basement was so still Elena could hear her own heartbeat. Then he spoke, his voice low and far away. "When I was 12, Marcus was 8. My father beat him with a belt because he broke a vase." Elena looked at him. This wasn't a mafia boss anymore. This was a boy who'd never forgiven himself. "I hid in my room," Dominic continued, staring into nothing. "I could hear him screaming, each lash, each plea, and I did nothing. I just covered my ears and waited until it went quiet." His voice trembled slightly. "I told myself I'd make it up to him. I gave him money, position, everything. But I never gave him what he actually wanted." "What was that?" Elena asked softly. "To be seen as an equal." Dominic gave a small laugh, bitter as bile. "Not charity. Not a little brother who only got leftovers. Equality." He shook his head. "Instead, I gave him reasons to hate me while pretending I was being generous." "That doesn't excuse what he did," Elena said, her voice firm. "No," Dominic said, "but it explains it, and I have to live with my share of responsibility." Silence settled over them again. Two people with different wounds, but the same kind of pain. Both of them victims, both carrying guilt that was never theirs to begin with. Then Dominic reached out, slowly, gently. His fingers touched Elena's throat. Where the bruise Marcus had left was still dark against her skin. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. He didn't say a word. He only left his fingers there, feeling the trace of violence his brother had laid on her. In those gray eyes, Elena saw a quiet, smoldering rage. Not at her, at Marcus, at himself for letting this happen. "You're not a victim," Dominic said, his voice low and certain. "You're a survivor. There's a difference." Elena looked at him. The man in front of her had changed in her eyes. He wasn't Dominic Crane anymore, Boston's terrifying mafia boss. He wasn't the man the rumors said could kill without blinking. He was just a man with scars no one could see. A man trying to make amends for mistakes that were already too late to fix. A man who, like her, was searching for a way out of his own past. That afternoon, before Elena left, Dominic called her back. He slid a silver ring off his finger and held it out to her. The ring was heavier than Elena expected, and on the inside were 2 engraved initials. D.C. "You need to find someone," Dominic said, his tone grave. "His name is Jimmy, James Chen. He's the only person I trust completely. If there's anyone who can help us, it's him." He described the address of a bar in Chinatown called the Red Lantern. "Red Lanterns. You go inside, find a middle-aged Asian man sitting in the back corner. Tell him the old man sends his regards, then give him this ring." Elena nodded and slipped the ring into her coat pocket. She didn't ask why Dominic couldn't reach out himself. She already knew the answer. He couldn't trust anyone in his organization anymore. Marcus had taken control. Any call could be monitored. Any message could be a trap. Only the direct presence of an outsider, someone no one would suspect, could break the siege. That night, Elena knocked on Mrs. Patterson's apartment door. The elderly neighbor opened it with her familiar smile. "I have to work the night shift," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady even as her heart raced. "Could you watch Noah for me?" Mrs. Patterson nodded without a hint of doubt. "Go on, honey. He'll be just fine with me." Elena hugged Noah tight and kissed her son's forehead. She didn't know what tonight would bring. She didn't know if she'd make it back, but she knew she had to do this. She drove to Chinatown after the city lights came on. The Red Lantern sat in a narrow alley, red light spilling from hanging lanterns onto wet pavement. Elena took a deep breath and stepped inside. The bar was dim and crowded. The smell of cigarette smoke and whiskey clung to the air. She scanned the room, searching for the man Dominic had described. The back corner. A middle-aged Asian man sat alone, his back against the wall, his eyes taking in the entire room. His face was carved from stone, his gaze sharp as a blade. Elena walked straight to his table. The man looked up at her, wary. "The old man sends his regards," Elena said, her voice low but clear. The man went still, his eyes narrowed as he sized her up from head to toe. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cold. Elena didn't answer. She only set the ring on the table. James Chen stared at it. Then he picked it up, turning it over in his hand, studying the engraving inside, and something in him cracked open. "Dominic Crane is dead," he said, his voice shaking. "The whole world knows that." "He's not dead," Elena said. "He's in a basement, badly injured, being held by his own brother." James Chen lifted his eyes to hers. Those knife-sharp eyes were wet now, rimmed red. The hand holding the ring trembled. 3 weeks, he said, his voice catching. "I've been looking for him for 3 weeks. I tore this whole city apart. And he was right here, under our noses. He needs to be rescued," Elena said. "Who are you?" James Chen asked, looking at her with an expression that held both gratitude and suspicion. "Why are you helping him?" "I'm nobody," Elena said. "Just a house cleaner who can't walk away." James Chen studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, his gaze softening. "That's not nobody," he said. "That's the only kind of person worth trusting in this world." They made their plan in the bar's darkest corner. Friday night, midnight, an armored vehicle, a private doctor, a safe house outside the city. "I'll get my people ready," James said, "but we have to move fast. If Marcus finds out, there'll be blood. Friday night, midnight, be ready." He spoke the last words as Elena stood to leave. She stepped out of the bar, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't notice the black car parked across the street. She didn't see the man inside lifting his phone. She didn't hear the quiet click of a photo being taken. And she didn't know that everything she'd just done had been recorded, moment by moment. Friday night, close to midnight, Elena sat in James Chen's car, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through her ribs. They parked 1 street away from the mansion, tucked into the darkness beneath the tree canopy. James checked his gun with practiced, icy precision. "Ready?" he asked. Elena nodded, even though she wasn't sure she truly was. They moved through the night, slipping past the fence and across a lawn glazed with dew. The back door was still unsecured, just as it had been every time Elena broke in. She led James down into the basement, where Dominic was waiting. He was already sitting up, his eyes lighting when he saw them. "Jimmy," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion even as he tried to keep it steady. James Chen stepped closer and dropped to a knee beside his boss. His eyes were rimmed red. 3 weeks, boss. I thought you were dead." "So did I," Dominic said, until she showed up. He looked at Elena, his gaze holding something she didn't dare name. They helped Dominic to his feet. He was weak, but he could walk if someone supported him. James on one side, Elena on the other. They guided him up the stairs, slow step by slow step. Before they stepped out of the house, Dominic turned to Elena. "No matter what happens, you stay behind me," he said, in a tone that wasn't a request. It was an order. Elena was about to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced her. They crossed the lawn toward the car waiting in the shadows. 20 meters to go. 15. 10. Then everything shattered. Headlights flared from 3 directions, so blinding Elena had to squeeze her eyes shut. When she opened them again, they were surrounded. Black vehicles formed a wide arc, and armed figures stepped out of the darkness. And at the center of it all, Marcus walked forward, clapping slowly with a victorious smile. "A house cleaner playing the hero," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Elena's blood turned to ice. He knew. From start to finish, he'd known. The photos from the bar. She'd been followed. Another car rolled in behind Marcus. The door opened. A man stepped out, and the air seemed to thicken around him. He looked about 50, silver hair, an expensive suit, eyes cold as a snake's. Roman Castellano. Elena had heard Dominic speak the name. The boss of the rival family. The one behind the plot to assassinate Dominic. Roman walked straight toward them, his gaze locked on Dominic. "Dominic Crane," Roman said, smooth as silk and sharp as steel. "Boston's great king. Look at you now, bleeding, broken, rescued by a maid." Dominic straightened despite the pain, his shoulders pulling away from James and Elena. He faced Roman with pride that didn't bend an inch. "Roman," he said, his voice cold as ice, "still letting other people do your dirty work for you?" Roman smiled. Your brother came to me himself, begged me to help him take what should have belonged to him all along. How could I refuse that kind of family loyalty? He stepped closer, lowering his voice into something that carried a threat like a blade. I'm going to enjoy watching you die. And after that, I'm going to take everything you built. Your casinos, your hotels, your city. Marcus moved to Roman's side, his eyes burning with hatred as he stared at his brother. Kill them all, he ordered. Make it look like a robbery. Roman nodded, then glanced at Elena. The woman too. No witnesses. Elena felt her knees start to give. She was going to die. Right here. Tonight. Noah would be motherless. Her son would grow up without her, the way she'd grown up without anyone. Everything happened in a heartbeat. James Chen drew his gun before anyone could react. 2 shots cracked the air, and 2 of Roman's men dropped. Chaos exploded. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Elena was yanked down to the ground, Dominic's body covering her even though blood was still leaking from his old wound. Somehow, despite how weak he was, Dominic grabbed a gun from the hand of a dead man nearby. He fired and hit someone, aiming at Elena. Then another. She lay beneath him, hearing the shots thunder, feeling the heat of bullets ripping past them. Then Dominic groaned, a raw sound of pain he couldn't hold back. A bullet drove into his back as he bent over to shield her. No, Elena screamed. Dominic didn't collapse. He stayed over her, still shielding her, even as his shirt darkened with blood. Then, like a miracle, sirens sliced through the alley. Headlights blazed in, and other vehicles surged forward. James's people, the backup team he'd quietly summoned. Reinforcements had arrived. Roman and Marcus looked around, realizing the tide had turned. Without another word, they jumped into their car, tires shrieking on the pavement as they disappeared into the night. The remaining gunmen either went down or surrendered. James ran to Elena and Dominic. "Boss," he called, frantic. "We have to get you out of here now." Elena helped lift Dominic, her hands slick with his blood. He was pale, his breathing thin, but he was still conscious. "Stay with me," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't you dare die. You hear me?" Dominic looked at her, a faint smile on his blood-smeared lips. "Not yet," he whispered. "I still haven't taken you out to dinner." The wooden cabin sat deep in the outskirts forest, nearly 2 hours from the city by car. All around it, there were only trees and darkness, not a single neighboring light because there simply were no neighbors at all. This was the secret hideout James Chen had prepared years ago for situations like this. They carried Dominic inside and laid him on the bed in the main bedroom. He'd passed out on the drive, having lost too much blood. His face was white as paper, his lips drained of color, his breathing so faint Elena had to lean close just to feel it. The organization's private doctor arrived only 20 minutes later. An older man with steady hands and eyes that didn't waver. He ushered Elena out of the room, shut the door, and began surgery right there on the oak bed. Elena sat in the hallway with her back against the wall, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Her hands were still smeared with Dominic's blood, dried and crusted against her skin. She didn't bother to wash them. She couldn't do anything except sit there and wait. James Chen sat a few steps away, his shoulder bandaged too, a bullet having grazed his arm in the gunfight. He didn't speak. He just sat there, silent, waiting the way she was. An hour passed, then 2. Elena took out her phone and called Mrs. Patterson. Her elderly neighbor's sleepy voice came through the line. "Noah's fine," she said. "He's sleeping like a rock. Don't you worry, sweetheart. Just focus on your work." Elena thanked her and hung up, and then she cried, soundless. Tears simply slid down her cheeks and fell onto her blood-stained hands. She cried because Noah was safe. She cried because she'd almost died tonight. She cried because the man behind that door had taken a bullet for her. She didn't know how long she cried. She only knew that when she lifted her head again, the clock read 3 o'clock in the morning. The bedroom door opened. The doctor stepped out, sweat soaking his brow, but his expression had softened. "He's out of the danger zone," he said. "The bullet didn't hit any vital organs. He needs rest, but he'll live." The doctor paused, then looked at Elena. "He wants to see you." Elena stood, her legs trembling as she stepped into the room. Dominic lay on the bed, white bandages wrapped around his chest, his face still pale, but his gray eyes were open. He watched her come in, and something flickered in those tired eyes, a small thread of light. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and looked at him. "You almost died because of me," she said, her voice shaking. "You almost died because of me," Dominic replied, his voice rough and weak. Twice now, silence settled over them. The room held only Dominic's shallow breathing and the wind slipping through the window crack. Then he spoke again, his voice no more than a whisper. "I've never said this to anyone," he said. "When my father died, I didn't cry. I felt relieved. He was a cruel man, Elena. To Marcus's mother, to Marcus, to everyone except my mother and me." Dominic paused. "I built this empire thinking I was different from him, better than him. But I'm not, am I? I've hurt people. I let Marcus become what he is now because I was too busy being king to be a brother." His eyes shone. Not quite tears, because Dominic Crane didn't cry, but close. "You asked why I didn't want you to call anyone to rescue me," he went on. "The truth is, I thought I deserved to die in that basement, like payment for everything I've done." Elena took his hand, her small hand in his, but she held on tight, as if she could pour strength into him through her skin. "Then why did you fight?" she asked softly. Dominic looked at her, gray eyes deep and steady. "Because you came back," he said, "and I thought, if someone like you can see something worth saving in me, then maybe it really exists." They didn't kiss. There were no promises of love. There was nothing but Elena's hand holding Dominic's. She stayed there beside him until those gray eyes drifted shut and his breathing evened out. For the first time in his life, Dominic Crane didn't sleep alone. James Chen stood outside the door, watching through the narrow crack. He saw Elena sitting by the bed, holding his boss's hand. And for the first time in 3 long, brutal weeks, he smiled. Maybe the boss had finally found something more valuable than power. 2 days later, Dominic could walk on his own. The wound still hurt, but he was a hard man, a man who'd learned how to endure. His gray eyes had cleared, no longer dulled by fever or blood loss. There was a fire burning in them now, a fire of resolve and a low, smoldering rage. Elena knew her apartment wasn't safe anymore. Marcus knew the address. He knew about Noah. She couldn't leave her son there for even one more day. So, with James Chen's help, she quietly brought Noah to the cabin. Mrs. Patterson was told Elena had to take her boy to visit relatives out in the suburbs for a few days. The elderly neighbor didn't press for details, only wished mother and son peace and safety. When Noah stepped into the cabin, his eyes widened with curiosity. Then he saw Dominic, a tall man with white bandages wrapped around his chest, a stern face, cold gray eyes. Noah took a step back and hid behind his mother's leg. Dominic caught the fear in the boy's eyes. And instead of standing over him, he did something Elena doubted he'd ever done in his life. He knelt down, lowering himself to the eye level of a 6-year-old. "You must be Noah," he said, his voice gentler than Elena had ever heard it. "Your mother talks about you all the time." Noah looked at him, still wary. "Are you the man my mom saved?" Dominic smiled, and for the first time Elena saw a real smile on his mouth. "That's right, and I'm going to make sure no one ever hurts your mother, or you. Ever." Noah studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether he should believe this man. Then the boy nodded, accepting the promise. That afternoon, Dominic met with the people who were still loyal. They sat around the wooden table in the living room, James Chen standing beside his boss like a shadow. Dominic laid out the plan. The transfer meeting would take place tomorrow night at the Crown Hotel in downtown Boston. Marcus would officially announce Dominic was dead and take control of the entire empire. Roman Castellano would be there to witness it and claim his share. That was when Dominic would appear. But not alone. He'd secretly contacted the FBI through his personal attorney. A deal had been signed. Dominic would deliver Roman Castellano, a man responsible for countless federal crimes, in exchange for immunity for the Crane organization on the related charges. The FBI would be there. Roman would be arrested, and everything would end. After the meeting, Elena pulled Dominic out onto the porch. She needed to speak to him alone. "And Marcus?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "What's going to happen to him?" Dominic didn't answer. His jaw hardened, his gray eyes darkening. That silence was the answer. "You're going to kill him," Elena said. Not a question, but a statement. Dominic looked at her. "He tried to kill me," he said, his voice like steel. "He threatened your son, and if you kill him, you become exactly what he thinks you are," Elena replied, stepping closer. "A monster without a conscience." "There are monsters the world needs," Dominic said. Elena held his gaze. "The man who told me he hid in his room while his little brother was beaten, that man isn't a monster. Don't let Marcus turn you into one." Dominic didn't respond. He only stood there, gray eyes on hers. And Elena could see the battle happening inside him. Between the man who wanted revenge and the man who wanted redemption. Between the Mafia boss and the 12-year-old boy still haunted by his brother's screams. He turned away and looked out through the window. Outside in the yard, Noah was playing tag with James Chen, his clear laughter ringing out in the late afternoon. "Tomorrow night, I'll take it all back," Dominic said, his voice low and distant, "and I'll decide what kind of man I want to be." The Crown Hotel rose like a fortress in the heart of Boston, 30 stories of glass and steel, a symbol of the Crane Empire. Tonight, the 30th floor was completely sealed off. A VIP conference room with glass walls overlooking the entire city, the place where billion-dollar decisions were made, where the fate of thousands could be decided with a signature. Marcus stood at the head of the table in an expensive gray suit, his hair perfectly styled, a smug smile on his lips. Around him were familiar faces, business partners, attorneys, a few officials Dominic had once bribed. And seated beside Marcus was Roman Castellano, the boss of the rival family, smiling with the satisfaction of a man who'd just won a long, patient game. "As you all know," Marcus began, solemn and draped in theatrical grief, "my brother, Dominic Crane, passed away in a tragic accident 3 weeks ago. As his only remaining next of kin, I'll assume full control of the Crane family's assets and business operations." Nods circled the table. No one questioned it. No one doubted. In this world, the dead stayed silent, and the living divided the spoils. Roman raised his glass and winked at Marcus. A new era begins. The conference room doors flew open. Every head turned, and the room froze. Dominic Crane walked in, black suit, no tie, gray eyes cold as ice. He moved slowly, one measured step at a time, like a king returning to his kingdom. Behind him, James Chen and 10 other men followed close, faces blank as stone, hands poised at their sides. The glass in Marcus's hand slipped and shattered on the floor. His face went pale as a corpse, his eyes wide with horror. "Hello, little brother," Dominic said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Miss me?" Marcus stumbled back a step, legs trembling. "You were supposed to be dead," he stammered. "That's right," Dominic said, a cold smile touching his mouth. "But someone reminded me that even monsters deserve a second chance." Roman Castellano reacted the fastest. He snatched the gun hidden inside his jacket and started to raise it toward Dominic. But in that same instant, the back door burst open. FBI agents poured in, weapons aimed in every direction. "FBI, nobody move." Chaos exploded. Shouts, chairs scraping and toppling, the sharp clink of handcuffs. Roman was slammed to the floor by 3 agents, his hands wrenched behind his back and cuffed. He screamed curses, spat, fought like a caged animal. As he was dragged past Dominic, Roman bared his teeth. "This isn't over, Crane." Dominic looked at him, gray eyes empty of emotion. "It's over," he said coldly. "You should have done it yourself, Roman. Never trust a coward to do a killer's work." Roman was hauled away, his curses echoing down the hallway until they faded into nothing. The room began to empty. The business partners were escorted out for questioning. The attorneys shook. The corrupt officials went gray as ash. Dominic drove everyone out. Even the FBI, even James Chen. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. "With my brother." The room was completely empty. Only the 2 of them remained. Dominic stood there, looking down at Marcus on his knees, shaking all over. "We're blood," Marcus sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "You can't do this to me." Dominic stepped closer, slow and measured. "You stabbed me," he said, his voice low and steady. "You left me to rot in a basement. You threatened a 6-year-old child. And now you talk about blood?" "I did it for us," Marcus cried, his voice desperate. "Father never loved me. You had everything, and I had nothing." Dominic's voice trembled, only slightly, but it would have been enough for Elena to notice if she'd been there. "I could have given you everything, Marcus. The company, the money, all of it. You only had to ask. You only had to be loyal." "I didn't want your charity," Marcus screamed. "I wanted to be equal." Dominic pulled out his gun. Marcus saw it and broke completely, collapsing to the floor, sobbing like a child. "Please, please, I'm your brother." Dominic stood over him, the gun aimed at Marcus's head. His hand shook, not from fear, from the war inside him. He remembered the 8-year-old boy being beaten with a belt, remembered the screams leaking through the bedroom door, remembered his own cowardly silence. Then he lowered the gun. "I'm not going to kill you," Dominic said, his voice hollow, "because that would be mercy. And I'm not generous enough for that anymore." He turned toward the door, where James Chen was waiting. "Call the FBI back in," he said. "I've got one more gift for them." Marcus was handcuffed. He screamed, fought, called Dominic's name. "Brother, I'm your brother. Dominic, Dominic." Dominic didn't look back. Not once. He walked out into the hallway, spine straight, steps steady, and at the far end of the corridor, Elena was standing there. She hadn't listened. She'd come anyway, even after he told her to stay at the cabin with Noah. When Dominic came closer, she saw it. A single tear slid down his cheek. Just one, then he lifted his hand and wiped it away, as if it had never existed, as if Dominic Crane never cried. A month passed. News of the Crane and Castellano case flooded every newspaper, every television channel, every social media feed. Mafia boss survives an assassination plot by his own brother. The sensational headlines were everywhere, alongside photos of Dominic, of Marcus in handcuffs, of Roman Castellano being marched into a police car. But another story spread just as fast, just as shocking. The story of the cleaning woman who saved the boss. Reporters hunted Elena like vultures that had caught the scent of blood. They parked outside her apartment, knocked at all hours, photographed her every time she stepped outside. She had to shield Noah's face whenever she took him to school, had to change her route to work, had to live like someone on the run inside her own city. Then one afternoon, when the noise had finally begun to settle, there was a knock at her apartment door. Elena opened it and found Dominic standing there. He looked nothing like the man she'd found in the basement. The same familiar black suit, but no blood, no bruises. His gray eyes were still sharp and cold, but there was something softer in them when they landed on her. He carried an envelope. She didn't invite him in. He didn't need an invitation. He stepped over the threshold and stood in the middle of her small apartment, with its worn walls and cheap furniture, like a king who'd wandered into a commoner's hut. He held the envelope out to her. Elena opened it. Inside was a check for $2 million, the deed to a house in the suburbs, and a scholarship file that would cover Noah all the way through college. Her hands began to shake. She pushed the envelope back toward him. "I didn't do it for these things," she said, her voice firm. "I know," Dominic said. "That's exactly why I want to give them to you. Not as payment, as a door." Elena looked at him, suspicion filling her eyes. "People like me don't get doors, Dominic. We only get walls." "Then let me knock one wall down," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Not because you saved me, because you deserve it. Because Noah deserves a chance I never had, to grow up without being afraid." Elena fell silent, staring at the papers in her hands. Then she lifted her head and met his gaze. "Why me?" she asked. "You could have anyone. Models, actresses, women who fit your world." Dominic stepped closer. "Because they'd want my money, my power, my name. And you don't want any of it. So what do you want?" Elena asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I want you to live," Dominic said, his voice softening. "You saw me bleeding on that concrete floor, broken, betrayed, dying, and you came back. Not for a reward, not for fame. You came back because you couldn't leave a stranger in the dark." He took her hand. "I've had people fear me, use me, worship me, but you're the first person who simply cared. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know what it's worth?" Elena's eyes shimmered. "I'm just a cleaner, Dominic. A single mother with nothing." "You're wrong," he said, gently lifting her chin. "You're the richest person I know. Because you've got something money can't buy. What is it?" "A heart that doesn't turn away." Silence filled the small room. Dominic didn't kiss her. There was no dramatic declaration. He only said, his voice gentle in a way it had never been before, "I'm not asking for anything. I just want to be here. For you, for Noah, whatever you're comfortable with." Elena looked at him, the most powerful man in Boston standing in her cheap apartment, gray eyes waiting for an answer she had every right to refuse. "One step at a time," she said at last. "But yes, stay." Dominic smiled. For the first time, Elena saw him smile without restraint, without hiding, without armor. Just a real smile that lit up those cold gray eyes. The bedroom door burst open. Noah ran out, bright-eyed. "Mom," he shouted, "is that the man you saved? Can he stay for dinner?" 6 months later, the federal trial took place in the Boston courthouse. The whole country was watching, with hundreds of reporters packed outside the building, cameras pointed in every direction. Marcus Crane was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and colluding with an armed criminal organization. Roman Castellano had been tried separately in an earlier case, sentenced to life without parole for a long list of federal crimes accumulated over 3 decades. Now it was Marcus's turn. He sat at the defense table, his expensive suit still crisp, but his eyes empty and worn. 6 months in detention had changed him. The smug arrogance was gone. All that remained was a man waiting for judgment. Elena was called as a witness on the afternoon of the trial's third day. She stepped up to the stand, swore to tell the truth, then sat in the chair facing the jury. Her heart was racing, but her expression stayed calm. She'd prepared for this moment. She'd known it was coming. Marcus's attorney was a middle-aged man in a three-piece suit, with eyes sharp as a knife. He stood and approached Elena with a courteous smile she knew was fake. "Miss Vance," he began, his tone sweet. "You work as a cleaner, correct? No license. You don't pay your taxes in full, correct?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice steady. "You have a history with violent men. Your ex-husband," he continued, flipping through the file in his hand. "My ex-husband beat me for 3 years. Elena cut in, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "I survived. That makes me a witness, not a liar." The attorney paused, but quickly recovered. "You received $2 million from Dominic Crane," he said, his meaning unmistakable. "Did you fabricate this entire story in exchange for money?" Elena looked at the jury. 12 people sitting there, listening, judging. She studied each face, then spoke, calm and certain. "I found a man bleeding to death in a basement," she said. "I went back because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. I'm testifying because it's the truth. And I accepted help because for the first time in my life, someone believed I deserved it." She turned and looked the attorney straight in the face. "I'm a cleaner. I'm a single mother. I'm nobody important. But I saw someone dying, and I chose not to walk away. That's all." The courtroom went silent. Marcus's attorney stood there, unable to find his next question. In the jury box, a middle-aged woman quietly lifted a hand to wipe away tears. Elena glanced toward the defense table. Marcus was staring at her. His eyes were full of hatred, but there was something else there too. Maybe respect. Maybe recognition. An ordinary woman with nothing in her hands had beaten him with the simplest truth. The trial dragged on for 2 more weeks. More witnesses were called. Evidence was presented. Lawyers argued back and forth. And at last, the jury returned its verdict. Marcus Crane, guilty on all counts. 28 years in prison. No parole for the first 20 years. When the judge read the sentence, Marcus didn't react. He just sat there, eyes fixed straight ahead, as if he'd known the ending for a long time. As he was led away, he turned and looked back at Dominic sitting in the gallery. The 2 brothers held each other's gaze for a long moment. No words were spoken. Then Marcus turned away, and the door closed behind him. Elena stepped out of the courthouse with Dominic beside her. Reporters immediately swarmed them, microphones and cameras thrust toward her face. "Miss Vance, what does it feel like to be a hero?" someone asked. Elena didn't stop. She kept walking, her voice rising above the chaos. "I'm not a hero," she said. "I just did what anyone should do. The problem is, not everyone does." 1 year after the trial, the Second Chance Foundation officially launched. Its office sat in downtown Boston, inside an older building that had been renovated, not far from Dominic's Crown Hotel. The opening ceremony was simple but warm, with fresh bouquets, hopeful faces, and a brand new sign bearing the organization's name in gold lettering. Dominic funded every operational cost, but from the beginning he made one thing perfectly clear. "This is yours," he told Elena on opening day. "I'm just the one who signs the checks." Elena shook her head, looking at him with gratitude but also with a firm resolve. "I don't want to hand out charity money," she said. "I want to create opportunity, jobs, skills training, legal support for people who don't have a voice." And that was exactly what the Second Chance Foundation did. The first person to walk through the door was Maria Santos, a 52-year-old house cleaner. She arrived with trembling hands and frightened eyes, and told Elena about 8 years of harassment by her employer. She couldn't report him because she didn't have legal residency papers, didn't speak English, didn't have power. He said nobody would believe a janitor over him, Maria told Elena, her voice breaking. Elena smiled, a smile filled with understanding. "I've heard that before." The foundation provided Maria with an attorney, an interpreter, and emotional support through the entire lawsuit. Maria won, receiving $200,000 in damages. Now she manages the housekeeping department of a major hotel downtown, training new staff, answering to no one but herself. At the foundation's gala, Maria stood before the crowd, tears shining in her eyes. "She showed me my voice has value," she said, looking toward Elena. "No one has ever done that for me before." The second was Kevin Wright, 34, a former inmate. Kevin served 8 years for armed robbery. When he got out, nobody would hire him. All they saw was a criminal record, not a human being. They only see the rap sheet, Kevin said bitterly. The foundation paid for Kevin to train as an electrician and helped him earn his license. Now he has his own apartment, a steady job, and last month he saw his daughter again after years apart. The child had grown into a teenage girl without him even knowing. She gave me a second chance when the whole world said I didn't deserve one, Kevin said at the gala, his voice thick. The third was Anna Chen, 19, a survivor of human trafficking. Anna had been smuggled from China to the United States when she was 15, forced to work in an illegal massage parlor. An anonymous call to the foundation's hotline led to the rescue. The foundation paid for Anna's therapy, GED classes, and community college tuition. Now Anna volunteers at the foundation, helping other survivors like she once was. She didn't just save my life, Anna said, her eyes wet as she looked at Elena. She gave me a reason to keep living. Through all of it, Elena and Dominic's relationship grew slowly and carefully. 8 months of dating, no rushing, no pressure. Dominic came to dinner at Elena's new home every week, the suburban house he'd bought for her and Noah. He helped Noah with homework, played ball with the boy in the backyard, learned how to become part of an ordinary family. Sometimes Elena watched the two of them, the most powerful man in Boston, patiently explaining long division to a 7-year-old, and she had to turn away to hide her tears. They still weren't living together. Elena wanted to do everything the right way. She didn't want Noah growing up thinking his mother had jumped into a relationship for money or power. She wanted Dominic to understand she was with him not for what he had, but for the man he was becoming. And Dominic accepted that. He waited. He didn't push. He was simply there, day after day, proving it with actions instead of words. Late one evening at the foundation office, Elena sat in front of her computer screen, staring at the long list of people who needed help. Hundreds of names, hundreds of stories, hundreds of lives waiting for a door to open. How do we help them all? She whispered, her voice heavy. Dominic stood beside her and rested a hand on her shoulder. One person at a time, he said gently, like you did for me, like you're still doing. On a drizzly afternoon, Elena drove to a cemetery outside Boston. She hadn't been here in years, but today, after the foundation gala, after hearing Maria Santos speak about finding her voice, she felt she needed to come. She carried a bundle of white flowers, simple daisies the woman had loved. The grave was in a far corner of the cemetery, beneath the canopy of an old oak tree. The headstone had gone gray with time, but the inscription was still clear. Helen Porter, 1950 to 2012. She made invisible children feel seen. Elena knelt and set the flowers beside the stone. Light rain fell into her hair, but she didn't care. She only stared at the words, and memory rushed in. Mrs. Porter had been the housekeeper at the orphanage where Elena grew up. She'd worked there for 20 years, mopping floors, washing clothes, cooking meals. No one noticed her, the way no one noticed children without parents. But Mrs. Porter noticed Elena. She taught her to read when no one else could be bothered. She held her whenever she cried. She told her she deserved to be loved, even when the whole world seemed to disagree. Then she got cancer. And because she was only a housekeeper without insurance, without savings, she died when Elena was 16. Elena never got to say goodbye. I thought of you today, Mrs. Porter, Elena whispered, her voice trembling in the rain. A woman came to the foundation. She's a housekeeper too, like you, 52, cleaning offices since she was 20. Her boss called her a little girl. She thought it was normal. Elena paused and swallowed back tears. I told her no, not anymore. The wind moved through the branches, leaves rustling like a whispered reply. You always said I had a big mouth, Elena murmured with a small smile through her tears, that I'd get myself in trouble because I never knew when to stay quiet. Turns out, that wasn't a bad thing. I wish you could meet Noah. My son's so smart, Mrs. Porter, and so kind. He laughs like you know? I don't understand why, but he does. She fell silent for a moment and let the rain run down her cheeks, mixing with her tears. And there's a man, she went on, her voice softer now. He's complicated. Dangerous too, maybe. But he looks at me like I matter, not like a housekeeper, or a victim, or someone being handed scraps. Just me. Elena let out a choked little laugh. I think you'd like him, or you'd smack him with a broom and tell him he'd better treat me right. Maybe both. She stood, looking at the headstone one last time. I'm trying to do what you did, she said. Make invisible people feel seen. I hope you're proud of me. Elena walked away in the soft rain, no umbrella, letting each drop fall freely. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. She carried Mrs. Porter with her, in every person she helped, in every voice she lifted up. 3 years after that rainy afternoon at the cemetery, the Second Chance Foundation held its 2-year anniversary celebration in a large hall in downtown Boston. Hundreds of people came, not only donors and officials, but also those the foundation had helped, the volunteers, the people who believed in its mission. The hall overflowed with light and laughter, fresh bouquets placed everywhere, and a large banner hung above the stage that read, 2 years, hundreds of lives, countless second chances. Maria Santos spoke first. She stood on stage in a new dress, confident and radiant, and told the story of her journey from a harassed housekeeper to a respected hotel manager. "My voice has value," she said, her words ringing through the hall. "Elena taught me that." Kevin Wright came next, speaking about 8 years in prison and the stigma waiting for him when he returned to society. He held up a photo of his daughter, the little girl now 12, and calling him Dad. "She gave me a chance when nobody else would," Kevin said, his eyes shining red. Anna Chen, now 22, and in her final year of college, spoke about being pulled out of the hell of trafficking. "She didn't just save my life," Anna said, looking toward Elena in the front row. "She gave me a reason to live." The mayor of Boston stepped onto the stage and presented the foundation with a commendation for outstanding service to the community. Elena accepted the plaque with a humble smile, and she thought of Mrs. Porter, of the woman who'd taught her that invisible people deserve to be seen. Then it was Noah's turn. The 9-year-old walked onto the stage, a little shaky with nerves, but his eyes bright with determination. Elena didn't know what her son was going to say. He'd asked to prepare the speech himself. "My mom taught me that one person can make a difference," Noah began, his clear voice carrying through the hall. "My mom isn't a superhero. She doesn't have superpowers or a cape. She just didn't look away when someone needed help." He paused and looked down at his mother. "Some kids at school asked me why my mom was on TV. I told them it's because my mom is brave. Not the loud kind of brave, the quiet kind. The kind that shows up even when you're scared." Noah smiled. "And that's better than any superhero I know." The hall went silent for a beat. Then people rose to their feet, applause crashing like thunder. Elena cried, tears streaming down her cheeks, not even bothering to wipe them away. This was a moment she'd never dared to dream of. After the ceremony, when most of the guests had gone, Elena and Noah sat on the steps outside the hall, watching people pass in the amber light of sunset. "Mom?" Noah asked, his voice thoughtful. "Do people remember us, after we're gone?" Elena pulled her son into her arms and kissed the top of his head. "Maybe they do. Maybe they don't," she said gently. "But that isn't what matters, sweetheart." "Then what matters?" Noah looked up at her. "What matters is what we do when nobody's watching," Elena said, her voice warm and sure. "Standing up even when you're afraid. Being kind even when it's hard. Mrs. Porter, the woman who raised me, she was never famous. Nobody wrote books about her. But she changed my life. And now I try to change other people's lives. And they'll change more people too." She smiled. "It's like throwing a stone into a pond. The ripples keep spreading even after the stone sinks." Noah thought about it for a moment. "So we just pass it on?" Elena nodded, her eyes shining. "That's right, honey. We pass it on." Footsteps sounded behind them. Dominic came and sat beside them, holding out a cup of ice cream to Noah. The boy lit up and took it. "What are you two talking about?" Dominic asked, looking from Noah to Elena. "Ripples, Dad." Noah answered around a lick of ice cream. "We're talking about ripples." Dominic looked at Elena, confused. Elena laughed and rested her head on his shoulder. "He'll explain later." They had married 6 months earlier. A simple ceremony at City Hall with only Noah, James Chen, and Mrs. Patterson there. No reporters, no noise, just them and the people they loved most. Noah had started calling Dominic Dad the day of the wedding, and it brought tears to both adults' eyes. The 3 of them sat there on the steps, watching the sunset paint the Boston sky red. The most powerful man in the city, the woman who once had nothing, and the little boy eating ice cream with an innocent smile. A family Elena had never dared to dream of. The night after the anniversary, the penthouse on the top floor looked out over Boston, glittering under a sea of lights. Noah was fast asleep in his room, worn out after a long day, heavy with feeling. Elena stood alone on the balcony, letting the night wind move through her hair as she watched the city below like a carpet of light stretching all the way to the horizon. Dominic stepped out and came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just stayed there, warm and steady, like a rock she could lean on. "Do you ever regret it?" Dominic asked after a stretch of silence. "Going into that basement?" Elena thought. She remembered the fear, the blood, the nights she couldn't sleep. Marcus's hand tightening around her throat. The trial. The camera lenses pointed at her face everywhere she went. "No," she said, her voice certain. "Not for a second." "Why?" "Because I found a father for Noah. I found a purpose. But most of all," she turned and looked at him, "I found my voice again. And I didn't even know I'd lost it." In Elena's mind, images slid past like a film reel. The dark basement, the bloodied man on the concrete floor, the decision to go back even knowing she might die, Marcus's cold voice reading out Noah's name and address, gunfire in the night, Dominic shielding her with his own body, standing before the jury, telling the truth while the attorney tried to smear her. Maria, Kevin, Anna, the grateful faces at the gala, Mrs. Porter's grave in the rain, Noah talking about ripples spreading outward. Elena had once believed courage belonged to other people, people with money, with power, with education, people who mattered. But courage wasn't loud. It didn't need a stage or an audience. Courage was steady. It was showing up when you were shaking with fear. It was speaking when your voice was still unsteady. It was protecting someone even when you still couldn't protect yourself. Deep down, Elena was still a cleaner. Still a single mother trying to hold life together. Still nobody important at all. But she'd learned something in that dark basement. Your voice has value, even when it trembles. Even when it feels like nobody's listening. Even when you think you're too small to change anything. Because sometimes, one voice is enough to break the silence. Elena leaned back into Dominic, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat behind her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm happy," she said. "Am I allowed to be?" He kissed her hair. "You're required to be." From inside the apartment, Noah's voice called out, "Mom, Dad, can I have ice cream?" Elena laughed. "It's 10 o'clock at night." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "So that means yes, right?" Their three laughs blended into the night air as they went back inside. A family. Under the quiet, she'd found her voice, and it had changed everything. Elena's story teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in spite of fear. That even the most ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they dare to speak up. That kindness, empathy, and human decency can change anyone's fate, even those who seem to have lost everything. And most of all, your voice, no matter how small, has value and deserves to be heard. If this story touched your heart, please hit like and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more moving stories updated every day. We'd truly love to know how you feel about this story. Have you ever met someone like Elena in real life? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to help a stranger? Please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We always cherish every message that comes from the deepest part of your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace. Thank you for staying with us to the very end of this story. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.